The night had grown late as I sat down with my friend for dinner. We were deep in conversation, and the day had been long, making the thought of heading home unappealing. Instead, we decided to take a late-night drive. It was around 2 a.m. when we hit the national highway, passing through the infamous suicide forest. The road cut through the dense, dark woods, and although we occasionally saw trucks, there were no other cars on the road. The forest surrounding us was thick and impenetrable, with no streetlights in sight. It was a quiet, eerie place, especially when the sun had set, as you never knew what could be lurking in the shadows. As we cruised down the highway, something strange happened. My car started acting up, the accelerator seemed to fail, and the car began slowing down. The battery indicators flashed as if the charge was dying. The vehicle started to come to a stop in the middle of nowhere, with nothing around except the dark woods. I had driven through this area many times before during the day, but at night, it was a completely different experience, unsettling, with the dark forest closing in on us. My friend urged me not to turn off the engine, fearing that if I did, the car might not start again. So, I carefully pulled the car onto the hard shoulder. It was then that we realized there was no help nearby. Back in those days, mobile phones weren't as widespread as they are now, and while I had one, we had no signal. We were stranded in the dead of night, surrounded by nothing but trees. After a few moments of hesitation, I decided to leave the car and search for a payphone. My friend stayed behind, trying to keep the engine running while I ventured into the darkness, hoping I could find a phone to call for help. I knew the area well enough to recall that there were some tourist facilities not too far away. I hoped there would be a payphone in one of the parking lots. After about 10 minutes of walking, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was coming from a phone booth. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I moved quickly toward it. But as I got closer, something felt off. The area was completely deserted. No cars, no people, just the eerie silence of the forest surrounding me. The only light in that vast emptiness came from the phone booth itself. As I approached the booth, I stopped in my tracks. Inside, there was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than a primary school student. She was curled up on the floor, her small frame hunched over as if in fear. It was well past 2 a.m., and there she was, all alone in front of the dark and ominous suicide forest. What was she doing here? I tried to rationalize the situation, but nothing made sense. Though everything in me felt uneasy, I knew I needed that phone to call for help, or else I would be stranded in the woods. I cautiously called out to the girl, trying to get her attention. She looked up at me, and that's when I saw it, a large bruise on her face just below her right eye. My heart skipped a beat. What was I getting myself into? Why was a young girl alone in the woods at this hour? I approached her, trying to speak to her gently. She explained that her mother had told her to wait in the parking lot while she went into the forest. Her mother promised she'd return soon, but she never did. The girl seemed to believe that her mother wouldn't be coming back. I felt a chill run through me as the possibility crossed my mind. Was this somehow connected to the infamous suicide forest? She sat on the floor, her knees hugged to her chest, staring blankly at the ground. The sadness in her eyes was palpable, and I knew I couldn't leave her there alone. I needed help. I used the phone in the booth to call a friend of mine who owned a garage, but of course, it was the middle of the night. I tried calling him several times, but he didn't answer. Finally, his wife picked up, and I explained the situation, asking her to contact the police to help the girl. She told me to wait, then hung up. I placed the receiver back on the hook, but when I looked around, the little girl was gone. She had vanished. I looked everywhere but couldn't find her. My anxiety spiked as I saw her, out of the corner of my eye, heading into the forest. I began to panic. She was searching for her mother, but the woods were dark, and I feared for her safety. I chased after her, calling out to her, but she was fast. My heart raced as I pushed myself harder to keep up with her. But no matter how fast I ran, she seemed to be getting further away. The forest was uneven and dangerous, with holes that could swallow you up in an instant, and in the dark, it was easy to lose your footing. I had to find her before it was too late. I reached out to grab her arm, but just as I did, someone grabbed me from behind and yanked me backward. I spun around in shock. It was my friend. I thought he was still waiting in the car. Even though it was pitch black, I could make out his features. He was shouting at me in a harsh voice, asking what I was doing out here. I was more focused on finding the girl, but my friend seemed determined to pull me away. He insisted that there was no girl in the forest, and that I must have imagined the whole thing. He said that he'd been worried because I had been gone for over 2 hours. 2 hours? I thought to myself, it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. My friend explained that we needed to call professionals to help search for the girl. We returned to the car, and I immediately called my friend at the garage to see where he was. He spoke to my friend on the phone, and I could still feel the lingering sense of panic in my chest. The garage worker said that they hadn't received any calls that night, and I was confused. I had spoken to his wife, who had told me to wait there. But my friend explained that his wife hadn't been home that weekend. She had been visiting her sister, and the phone hadn't rung. I was left with a sinking feeling in my stomach. Who had I spoken to on the phone that night? And who was the little girl? I don't know if I imagined the entire thing, but it felt so real. I couldn't shake the memory of it. It was the most terrifying experience I've ever had, and to this day, it remains a complete mystery. "10 years ago, I was at the beginning of my career. I was working for a startup IT company, and my days were filled with challenges and pressure. I frequently presented reports to the president of the company about the progress of the projects I was managing. One day, the president invited me to stay at his private villa near Mount Fuji. It was an unusual offer, but I decided to accept without much thought. I didn't know the exact location, just an address, so I had to rely on my phone and driving skills to get there. As I drove through winding roads, a sense of uncertainty started creeping in. The president had mentioned that he owned a villa in the area, but he also mentioned there were many villas nearby, with landmarks like a tennis court separating them, which wasn't very helpful in pinpointing the exact place. I arrived at the villa just after 4 p.m., and although the sun was setting, the weather was pleasant, making the evening a perfect time for a walk. The next day, we had an important meeting scheduled, but after the party held at the villa, I decided to take a short walk around the area to enjoy the peace and nature. The front of the villa had a paved tennis court, and at the back, it overlooked a dense forest of trees that stretched towards a mountain. I felt an urge to head into the forest, as it seemed like the perfect opportunity to take in the scenery. As I walked, I wondered if this forest could be part of the famous suicide forest, which is located near Mount Fuji, a place with a sinister reputation. After about 5 minutes of walking, I spotted 2 figures ahead of me. A man in his 40s was walking with a young girl who seemed about 5 years old. They looked like father and daughter. I watched them for a moment, and then something struck me as odd. They were walking in the wrong direction. Instead of heading back to the villa, they were walking deeper into the forest. A sense of unease washed over me. I wasn't sure if I was witnessing something sinister, but with the sun setting and the situation feeling more wrong by the second, my gut told me that something was off. The man briefly glanced in my direction with a suspicious look, which made my suspicions grow. What if this man was taking the child into the woods to harm her? My mind raced. I thought about running back to the villa to tell someone, but I feared that by then, he would take the girl even further into the forest, and I might lose them. I decided not to take my eyes off them. I ran toward them and called out, but they both ignored me completely. They didn't turn around. I shouted louder, "Hey, where are you going?" Still, they didn't respond. They kept walking deeper into the woods. I tried to chase after them, jogging at first, then running, but no matter how fast I went, the distance didn't seem to shorten. I was stunned. I looked behind me quickly, and I couldn't see the villas anymore. There was nothing but dark, thick trees stretching endlessly in every direction. I had wandered deep into the forest, and I realized I was lost. I had been so focused on following them that I had strayed off the path. Not only had I lost them, but I also had no idea which way to turn. The darkness was increasing, and I had no sense of direction. On top of that, I had lost sight of the man and the girl. What should I do? I came across a large tree, and suddenly, I felt eyes on me. It was a chilling sensation that I couldn't shake off. I turned around, scanning the surroundings, and then I looked up. That's when I saw someone hiding in the branches of the tree above me. I could hear breathing, and I tried my best to control my own. I forced myself to stay calm, try not to panic. Then I heard a voice, a man's voice, whispering. Another voice, a child's voice, whispered back. My veins turned to ice, and I froze. I couldn't move. The man whispered again, and the child answered. It was at that moment that I truly believed I was going to die. Just then, I heard a shout. It was a voice calling out to me. I turned to see two strangers running toward me through the forest. I was exhausted, and I felt like I was about to collapse, but miraculously, they found me. They managed to calm me down, and when I looked back, the shadows in the tree were gone. I told them everything that had happened as they led me out of the forest. They said they hadn't seen any man or child in the woods. I still don't know what it was that I encountered. I have no idea how I ended up in that situation, and I don't want to know what would have happened to me if those two walkers hadn't found me. But I am convinced that something evil lives in that forest. When I think back to the voices I heard, I tremble with fear. Aokigahara Forest, located at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan, is considered one of the most terrifying places on Earth. Known as the Sea of Trees, it has gained a horrific reputation as a hot spot for suicides, with hundreds of people each year choosing this place as their final resting ground. The forest plays a significant role in Japanese folklore and is regarded as one of the most haunted places on the planet. The eerie stories surrounding it are not just about ghost sightings and paranormal activity, but also about how easy it is to get lost within its depths. GPS systems rarely work there, and reports suggest that people have used guiding ropes to find their way in and out of the forest, some of which have been intentionally cut. According to reports from Japan Times, mysterious sounds can be heard coming from deep within the woods, and it is believed that evil spirits reside in the Sea of Trees, luring lost souls to their doom. Buddhist monks have even set up shrines and altars within the forest to counter these evil spirits. Naturally, the forest is also known for tragic discoveries of bodies and cursed objects, such as strange symbols and dolls nailed to trees. Aokigahara is definitely not a place you want to lose your way in. There are 3 stories that make you question whether suicide is the only cause of death in this infamous forest. After graduating, I joined an advertising company and took on the role of project leader. Each day was more chaotic than the last, and I was under immense pressure as the project leader. Moreover, the results I was getting were unsatisfactory, and the atmosphere at work was terrible. I think I was mentally and physically exhausted. One day, the pressure and stress reached a breaking point, and I left work without permission. I got in my car and drove off, not knowing where I was headed, but simply wanting to disappear that day. Nothing made me happy, no family, no life partner. I thought that death might be the easier way out, maybe an end or a new beginning. These thoughts echoed in my head as I drove. I didn't realize at that moment that something was drawing me toward Aokigahara. I didn't even notice that I was heading toward it. I stopped the car and walked toward the Sea of Trees without hesitation. It is said that once you enter Aokigahara, you quickly lose your sense of direction and any sense of place. Still, I moved deeper into the forest. I didn't actually want to die. I just wanted peace, a temporary escape from it all. As I walked down the path leading into the forest, lost in my thoughts, I suddenly heard a voice calling out to me. Surprised, I looked up and saw a man in his 40s, wearing work clothes. I assumed he was a volunteer patrolling the forest to prevent suicides. He said, "This area is restricted to the public, sir." I replied in a distracted tone. "Oh, sorry." He asked, "Are you lost? Are you alone?" Then he said, "Follow me, sir," in a commanding tone. I was worried I might be arrested for trespassing, so I followed him without thinking. I walked silently behind him for about 20 minutes as we ventured deeper into the forest. I began to feel uneasy. I had expected us to head toward the exit, but we were going deeper into the forest. I saw something ahead, a small wooden cabin in the thick woods. Why was there a cabin in the middle of a suicide forest? I was a little surprised when the man opened the door and said, "Come in." I entered, and he followed me in. From the outside, it looked like a rest stop, but inside it seemed like someone lived there. There was a kitchen and a single bed. The man pointed to a small wooden chair and said, "Sit." I sat down, and the chair was unstable. I felt it might break at any moment. I realized the chair was handmade, which intrigued me. I wondered if it had been made from trees in the suicide forest. Everything around me seemed worn and handcrafted. Even the dresser was made with rough, uneven materials. The bed wasn't made professionally either. Something about the place made me uncomfortable. There were warning signs in the air. The man sat on the bed opposite me and suddenly asked, "Do you want to die?" An awkward silence filled the room as I stared at the man's face, which was smiling. I started to seriously question whether this man was truly a volunteer or some sort of guardian. I regretted entering the cabin alone with him. "Did you hear that?" I asked him. He replied nonchalantly, "I didn't hear anything." I wasn't wrong. There was a sound, a woman's voice. I tried to trace where it was coming from, and the man opposite me watched me intently. The sound was coming from beneath my feet. I stared at the floor, and through the cracks, I saw eyes emerging from the darkness and heard a woman screaming. The man suddenly shouted, "Shut up!" and exploded in a fit of rage. He began stomping violently on the floor, grabbed an axe from a wooden shelf, threw the table aside, and ripped up the floorboards, heading toward what looked like a basement. I seized the opportunity to run and sprinted as fast as I could. The woman continued to scream. I couldn't look back, and I yelled, "Sorry, sorry." I couldn't see properly because of the tears in my eyes, and I ran until sunset. At that point, I realized I couldn't run any longer. I saw a flashlight beam in the distance and screamed, "Hey, I'm here," with my exhausted voice. I was about to lose consciousness and desperately wanted to tell someone about the cabin. Maybe someone could save the woman, but I realized I had made a grave mistake. How could I be so naive? How could I be sure that the person with the flashlight wasn't the man from the cabin? I didn't want to die here. Those were my last thoughts before I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed. The doctors told me that a man who was patrolling the area had found me. I asked the officer about the cabin in the forest, but the doctors said that the stress from work and getting lost in the forest had probably caused me to see things. The officer said it was not uncommon for people to hallucinate in the suicide forest. The police didn't even investigate the cabin, agreeing with the doctors that it was just a hallucination. I pray that's true, but I know what I saw. It was real, incredibly real. We know that many choose to end their lives in that forest, but I can't help but think that not all of them make that choice on their own. There is something incredibly sinister about that forest, and I never want to go back there again.